Hello and welcome everyone to our webinar today. We are going to be discussing CMMC. Just a few housekeeping notes before we begin. Just to remind you that there's tabs at the bottoms of the app here for questions, number one. Number two, attachment resources that we'd like to leave with you today. And then third, a rating option to give you the opportunity to rate this webinar and let us know how we did. We are going to have a pretty packed schedule, so we'll just sort of dive right into it. Today, we're going to be discussing CMMC, Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, version 2, and where we stand. Of course, we're going to talk about the future of the program for RPOs, C3PAOs, and the DIB in general. As well, we're going to talk to you about Audit Guidance, the SSP program, POAMs, and other required documentation that you need as part of the certification to keep you up to date on what's happening there. So I'm just going to give a brief intro about myself. Of course, our guest speaker, Matt, who's going to do most of the presenting today. And then we're going to walk into some Q&A. So feel free to ask questions all throughout the webinar. We will try to get to your questions throughout the Q&A period. If we do not, we will try to follow up with you to make sure that you get a nice response for the questions that you have today. So, of course, a bit about myself. My name is Adam Mansour. I've been the cybersecurity since 2005. I'm a registered practitioner here with ActZero, sponsoring the webinar today. I'm the CISO there, as well as vCISO for our clients, helping them through their documentation, audit guidance with NIST 800-171, and of course, CMMC. And I also, like Matt, was a founder of a company called Intellego that was acquired by ActZero in 2019. A bit about our guest speaker, Matt. Matt is the CEO of the CMMC AB. It is a organization chartered by the Department of Defense, but independent from it. The CMMC AB, of course, is helping thousands of organizations support the DoD to implement common and verifiable cybersecurity standards. Previous to his role as CEO of CMMC AB, he was the Deputy Director at the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, or CISA, as well as Deputy Undersecretary for National Protection, NPPD, with the Department of Homeland Security. Much like me, Matt had also founded an analytics company that was acquired by Cadmus prior to this as a consultant. So welcome, Matt. Thank you very much for taking the time to do this today.
Hey, Adam, thank you. Great to be with you, the ActZero team, and all of your partners and clients and friends. And I always welcome the chance to talk about CMMC, hopefully clarify some issues, answer questions, and give everyone, if nothing else, an updated sense of where we are with CMMC. As I think I shared with you during a prep session earlier this month, that when I first came aboard, it's been about a year since I became the CEO of the accreditation body. Someone said that explaining CMMC is more challenging than describing blockchain or Bitcoin to your grandparents. And so it's not necessarily an intuitive conformance regime. And with the changes that the Department of Defense have made going back to last fall, there are even more questions. So I appreciate the invitation from ActZero, and hopefully we'll advance the ball for all of you who are interested in understanding where we are, what it means for you, and how you can engage in CMMC. So what I thought I'd do, Adam, is I got a few slides here that I'll kind of use to guide my conveyance of kind of the status of where we are. And I'll try not to take too much time, and happy when we're done with that to just open it up for questions. So with that, I think I got control. I always have to lead by just saying, and you hit on it, Adam, that the accreditation body does not speak for the Department of Defense. We are the exclusive partner of the Pentagon in really helping implement CMMC. I'll get to kind of our formal roles, but nothing that I say here today should be construed or interpreted as representing official policy of the Department of Defense. So I always like to get that out of the way first. I want to talk about, and some of you may be new to CMMC. I imagine most of you kind of know what it is. I'll just really briefly touch on the basics, especially who we are and what we do. But I want to jump into 2.0 is the new version of CMMC that was announced last November, and a number of significant changes were made to the original CMMC 1.0. So I'll talk about that. Give you a sense on rulemaking because right now we are in this kind of interim period. And then I really just want to speak a bit about how I think you should think about CMMC and how it can really help you in terms of managing your own digital risk, aside from the impending government mandate to do it. And then, as I said, we'll take Q&A. So I think most of you know what CMMC is, but I'll just baseline it. This really is, or it seeks to be, the unifying standard within the defense industrial base to protect again, unclassified information. We're not talking about classified information. We're talking about CUI, controlled unclassified information, as well as federal contract information. That's what CMMC is designed to protect. And if people wonder, why is that necessary to protect? Well, it's because our global cyber threat actors, especially China, have been really robbing us blind in terms of using defense contracts to get a lot of the key information that they need for various acquisition systems and weapons platforms and what have you. And we recognized long ago this was a vulnerability. We've tried, we being the broader cybersecurity community and the Pentagon specifically, to make this a self-attestation, those requirements that have been in NIST 800-171 for a number of years now. And we just recognized, the department recognized that it wasn't getting the job done, which is why the department moved to a mandatory conformance regime. So what we are, we're an independent organization, Maryland-based. Did I just lose the slides there? Let me get those back up. Sorry about that. There we go. We are a Maryland-based 501c3, so we are a tax-exempt nonprofit organization, a charitable organization, if you will, that has an exclusive, it was a no-bid contract, but a no-cost contract. So we do not take any taxpayer money, do not take any money from the Pentagon. We receive all of our revenue from the licensing fees and application fees that members of the ecosystem charge. And ultimately, we will be accrediting and certifying both the C3PAOs and those individuals who work for them, but we should not really be seen as a policy-making organization. So happy to take questions on some of the policy foundations of the CMMC rules, of the CMMC parameters, but know that that's always going to be an inherently governmental function to set those rules. I talked about accreditation, so we are working towards our own recognition under ISO as a conformance assessment accreditation body. That's the journey that we go through to meet those international standards organizations. Those are the folks in Switzerland who kind of set global standards for this. And then once we receive that recognition under ISO 17011, we will then be accrediting those C3PAOs who conduct the assessments of DIB companies to those NIST 800-171 standards under 1720, which is the essentially the international standard for inspection bodies, as well as on the training side, certifying those tests, those high stakes exams that create those professional certifications for the individual assessors, which will be eventually done by the CAICO, the CMMC Assessor and Instructor Certification Organization. Will be spinning that out from us here in the coming months. So there'll actually be two different organizations. That'll be really a subsidiary to CAICO. So I just want to give everyone a quick snapshot on, people talk a lot about accreditation and certification. What does it all mean? So I just want to kind of clear that up in terms of, we are the accreditation body, and then the CAICO will be certifying individuals. Other things that we do, especially in these first couple of years, we have been trying to manage the ecosystem, both in terms of getting it stood up, but also we'll be really the oversight for conflicts of interest, for the code of professional conduct. I've said before that anyone who engages in CMMC should be assured that you're going to be treated fairly and that there's no bias, that everything is impartial, that one company is not going to have a leg up in terms of getting certified than another company because of relationships. And so we have a pretty rigorous, I should say, conflict of interest protection scheme in place that is managed, and that doesn't apply to us. It applies to really everyone in the ecosystem. And we try to do what I'm doing here today, clarify the standard. We conduct monthly town hall meetings. Hopefully some of you have attended some of those, where we once a month get the ecosystem together to go through what's new, what's happening. We've got a website that's not very good. We're creating a new one that hopefully will be unveiled here in May, and that'll have an enhanced marketplace. We really want to create that central location where DIB companies looking for assessment services can connect with those C3PAOs, individual assessors who might be looking to latch on with the C3PAO, the consultant wing of the ecosystem, those RPs and RPOs, as Adam managed, they connect with defense contracting companies. So we really hope that this new marketplace will help advance that market-making function that the ecosystem needs. And then we really serve as an informal advisor to the Pentagon as we collectively stand up CMMC. So that's just a bit about what we do. Let me get into kind of where we are. This is a quick slide just to talk about, if you're not familiar with the technical term, the ecosystem. It really does compose, or is comprised of, all the different players in the CMMC world, from those companies, those DIB companies, which we call organizations seeking certification, or OSCs, to those RPs and RPOs. Those are the coaches, the advisors, the trainers that help those DIB companies get ready for CMMC. The C3POs, as I mentioned in that yellow circle, are the ones conducting the assessments. The individual people who work for those C3POs are the individual assessors. They are trained by CMMC instructors, and those training courses are delivered by licensed training providers in the purple circle, those LTPs, who are using content generated by our licensed publishing partners. We've got 20 companies who are creating the curricula for CMMC. All of these circles work together to create the ecosystem, and we see ourselves really in the center of all that, helping support all those parts of the ecosystem, as well as helping the DoD get this to be a successful program. So 2.0, if you've been following CMMC, you're aware that in November, DoD announced the changes. What was driving these changes is not surprising when a new administration comes into its term, that they like to look at things and often improve things. That's what the Biden administration did. They looked at CMMC, and while they certainly agreed with the underlying principles of it, there had already been some public comment and certainly industry feedback from 1.0, and they wanted to improve it. So what's driving the changes were, our desire to clarify the standard, and I'll talk a bit about that here in a second. Ease the cost burden to industry. A lot of concern that CMMC, especially to small and mid-sized businesses, might be cost prohibitive, not only to prepare for it, but to actually pay for an assessment. The scalability of the ecosystem, if you think about how big the DIB is, 200,000 to 300,000 companies, this is going to be the most ambitious and the largest conformance assessment regime I think has ever been attempted. So how do we scale this responsibly? And then how can we instill greater trust and confidence in the ecosystem? That's where really we come in, among other things, in terms of making sure, as I said, that everyone who participates in CMMC is going to be treated fairly, and no one's got a hidden advantage. So that's what drove the changes. And then the changes that came out of it were really this. We went from 5 levels in the old model to 3 levels in the new model, the 2.0 model. So levels 4 or 2 and 4, old 2 and 4 were removed, and those were really never probably going to be an assessed level anyway. So 3 levels now. We called most people's attention to level 2, which is where these third-party assessments are going to be conducted. Level 1 has been changed in that there will be no mandatory assessments for level 1. These are just the practices, the 17 practices that protect federal contract information, not CUI. The government made a decision that from a risk assessment perspective, a risk management perspective, that the FCI data was not as critical to protect. Therefore, let's try to ease the cost burden and just make that a self-attestation. But it's a self-attestation with teeth in that it's going to have to be senior officials in those level 1 companies making that attestation, not a mid-level IT administrator. So level 2 is where most of the activity is going to occur. This is where the C3POs assess adherence to the NIST 800-171. And that's important too, because what used to be the CMMC model was 800-171 with about 22 other things you had to do, including some advanced maturity practices. That's been stripped away. So we talk about streamlining CMMC. What DoD did was to clean it up a bit, take away some of those bespoke practices, and align directly with 800-171. That makes it more clear. It makes it more adoptable by other federal agencies and frankly, other international partners as well. And so the CMMC model is now directly aligned to the 110 practices in 800-171. The department initially talked about a bifurcated level 2, again, as part of the scalability concern. How do we get this turned on? Because there's going to be more companies needing certification. probably than the ecosystem will have when we go live. They realized it was very tough to bifurcate. The original idea was we'll take half of level 2, make it requirement to get assessed by a third-party assessment organization, but the other half will self-attest. They've walked that back, and while they reserve the right to designate certain level 2 contracts for self-attestation, the vast majority of level 2 companies should expect and prepare for a third-party CMMC level 2 assessment. Level 3 is the advanced level. That's going to potentially take the companies that need the level 3. They'll have to do level 2 first, get that C3PO assessment completed, and then the DIBCAC, the Defense Industrial Base Cybersecurity Assessment Center within the Defense Contract Management Agency, will be conducting that level 3, which is based on 801.72. So those are the 3 levels of CMMC. 2 other big things: POAMs, plan of action and milestones, are going to be now allowed. That was new before. CMMC 1.0 is very much kind of a you either meet it or you don't. There's now an opportunity for some of those practices that may not be quite where they need to be to give 180 days to show up certain practices, not all of them, but certain practices. And then in very rare circumstances, waivers were also introduced. I think I've continued to understand from the department that waivers will be rare. Probably you can see situations where there might be a sole source provider of a unique technology, and that contract needs to move forward and can't without a waiver. So I think those are the types of scenarios you could see waivers, but certainly no one should expect to have the CMMC requirement waived. One important note is that CMMC will not be mandatory until rulemaking is finished. I'm going to talk about that here in a second. But also, once it goes live in terms of the mandatory requirements, it won't be retroactive. So they're not going to take any existing contracts you might have and say, okay, we're going to mod the contract now. Now you have to get CMMC certified. It will only be for new procurements or procurements that have been up for renew or rebidding. So I want to make sure everyone is clear on that. I talked about the POAMs and the waivers, so I won't speak more to that. But let me kind of go to what I talked about earlier about where exactly are we now. So if you've been following CMMC since its inception, which 2019, this is a couple of years later, and we are pretty close actually now to getting this up and running. Once the department announced that CMMC 2.0 was going to have these changes, that required another lap around the track of federal rulemaking. The previous CMMC rulemaking was for the 1.0 rules, and now that there are new parameters, those have to go through federal rulemaking. I won't get into the weeds about the Byzantine process of federal rulemaking. It involves a lot of people and a lot of agencies outside DoD, to include OMB and OIRA. Other departments often get to weigh in on and opine on new federal rules. Congress gets their chop at it. There's a public comment period and all of that. So that's going to take a while. The estimates generally can take anywhere from 9 months to 24 months. I don't think we're going to need 24 months for CMMC. From what I'm hearing is that they hope, and this is my understanding, I'm not speaking on behalf of the department, but my understanding is that right now they think they're tracking for a May 2023 completion of rulemaking. And so that means for the next year and a couple months, we'll be in this interim voluntary period. What happens when rulemaking is complete is that then contracting officers are able to insert CMMC requirements into contracts. Until then, they can't do it. But what can occur is that those companies who have been preparing, who have implemented CMMC, will be invited to go ahead and get certified, to engage the C3PAO and get certified for level 2. Those certifications, the plan would be recognized as legit, as CMMC certifications. And the benefit here, one of the incentives, is that the 3-year clock in terms of when your certification expires, wouldn't start until rulemaking is finished. So let's say a company gets CMMC certified level 2 later this spring or summer. They would essentially have, if rulemaking tracks to May 2023, you'd have about a 4-year valid certification, not a 3-year. So that's one of the incentives for those early movers. And we're working feverishly with the department to get this voluntary period up and running, finishing up documentation, working with other players in DoD to get everything squared away, and getting the EMAS system, which is the IT system of record that will be used to store the assessment data. That's a DoD IT system. Getting that those modifications finalized and getting that all approved for use. So 2 parallel tracks. The rulemaking is underway, meaning the department's got a team writing the draft rule. They'll be submitting that shortly if they haven't already to up to the OMB folks and the OIRA folks, and then that'll take a year. Meanwhile, we're working to get the voluntary period up and running. And so for the next year, we expect to be conducting, for the C3POs to conduct assessments for those companies ready to go. At the same time, the training and certification side of the ecosystem, that's not affected. The classes for that entry level of assessor, the certified CMMC professional, are underway. Those high stakes exams that give those individuals the professional certification will be offered later this year. And so that training and certification side, the CAICO side, is moving and is well underway, and looking forward to more and more people electing to become CMMC assessors. I'll just touch on a couple other things, like, well, okay, I'll talk about the ecosystem, Matt. Well, how big is it, and what's really the scalability of it? So these are just the applications in terms of the demand signal of individuals in the ecosystem, and I'll show you the growth from over the last year. So on that consulting side, those individuals and companies who are advising and coaching and consulting with defense industrial-based companies to get ready for CMMC, there's over 3,000 of those individuals, and 700 of those companies have applied to be those RPOs. In terms of the C3PAOs, we're over 400 companies who are in the compliance business who want to be C3PAOs. I think that's a really good number when you think about those 200,000 to 300,000 companies that ultimately will need certification. The licensed training providers, we've got plenty of those. The one that I'm really, that I keep an eye on is, do we have enough individuals in this country who want to be CMMC assessors? We're going to need more than that number shows there. We've had good growth over the last year. But when you think about it, we're looking for folks who want to be assessors and either work independently as a 1099 or work for a company as a W-2 as an assessor. I think this is a great entryway into cybersecurity. We talk a lot about the cybersecurity industry needs more people, and some people are intimidated. Well, I can't code. I didn't major in computer science. That's not required. You need some technical understanding to be a CMMC assessor. But whether it's a full-time job or a side hustle, you're going to be hearing from us a lot more over the next several months about kind of recruiting pitch to Americans to become CMMC assessors. If you look at the corollary to like CMMI, which is a different conformance regime for software development, those appraisers earn pretty good money. We expect that'll be the case here too. So we've got the framework set up with those licensed training providers, the content developers. Scantron is administering the test nationwide. We just need to make sure we got enough people in the pipeline who want to be assessors. And then final, I'll just end up here so I can leave time for questions. As you think about CMMC, the one thing I would encourage you is to just go ahead and get started. It's never too early to invest in cybersecurity. I promise you, and I speak from my days at DHS when I used to be able to see the intelligence cyber threat actors are not waiting for rulemaking to be completed. Even if you set aside the impending government requirements from DoD, you've got an interest in securing your own data, your own proprietary information, the PII of your employees, your financial data. These 171 CMMC practices represent basic cyber hygiene. No one's requiring anyone to build quantum computers or to do things that are at an advanced technological level. These practices are the blocking and tackling of good cyber hygiene, and they're going to benefit your company whether or not the department's got a contract clause in it to force you to do it or not. So one, never too late or never too early to get started. Use those resources, those RPs and RPOs who can help you. They are well-versed on all the intricacies of CMMC. They can help you get started, help you write that system security plan, and get you on your way. Think about what's important to you. We live in the information age. Your data, it might be everything to your business. What are you doing to protect it? Do you even know what's on your network? Do you know what's in your environment? Do you know who's in your environment? these are kind of the basic questions that as you assess your risk to intrusion or compromise that you need to be asking yourself. And if you're a CISO or a CIO and you don't get a whole lot of face time in the CEO or the COO's office, then use CMMC as an excuse to get in there and talk to them. Get engaged, develop a plan, and be honest about where you are. Do self-assessments, have an RPO, do an assessment, and then ultimately get certified. We expect CMMC certification to be the coin of the realm in federal acquisition, that eventually, and not too far from now, I think it'll be conspicuous if you don't have CMMC. Having that certification is going to convey to your partners, your clients, your competitors that you take cybersecurity seriously, and you've made the basic investment to protect your data and theirs. So, Adam, I'll stop there. I know you've got a few things you want to get out, but I look forward to the questions from the audience today.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt, for going through that. This doesn't end here, guys. Please feel free to ask any question into the chat here. It's down below. We're hoping to answer your questions here. It's anonymous, so if you want to ask anything you've been thinking, if we can't get to it, we'll come back and answer that. I'll just speak specifically to, if you want to get in touch with Matt, here's the contact information for him. Of course, they're always looking for C3PAOs, other RPOs, other people to join the program. We need that body. We need those bodies to push this forward across the DIB, which is hundreds of thousands of organizations across the U.S. And certainly, if you think about how we're trying to help at ActZero, we've been committed to this since it was in draft. Frankly, NIST 800-171, ITAR, DFARS requirements have always been part of our customer base, and so we've been very focused on making sure we can accelerate the consultation, the movement to getting through these controls, to getting through your self-assessments, to helping you. So we put a bunch of free resources here, and we're even offering you free time with us. We've offered trackers to help you sort of manage all the requirements in one place, just help you, sort of tick off boxes, assess where you are. Give you a good white paper about how to validate the information. There's, of course, a lot of audit guidance, PDFs on the CMMC website you can use to sort of see what the auditor would ask. And so, helping test those things is an easy thing to sort of practice one control at a time. And of course, we do have other webinar recordings about the transition from 1 to 2. I hear people all the time walk around and say, hey, I got level 3 requirements. That's not true anymore, likely, from what you meant it to be in CMMC 1. So, try to refresh yourself on the new standard. Again, as Matt says, the hope is that by May 2023, there is some, opportunity for people to get certified. That means we've got to put in the work now. And so if we have the opportunity to, give you some free time with us, feel free to contact us as an RPO. We are, for free, going to talk to you about controls, answer your questions where we can. It's exactly what the spirit of this webinar is, and frankly, what we think is good cybersecurity practice in general to help protect against cyber threats and data loss, right? Now, we get frequently asked questions here at ActZero all the time, right? As an RPO, certainly we have a number of different questions that come in. We've kind of boiled up the top 4 to get us started here that we can ask Matt. And so one of the first things, obviously, is we look to take advantage of the way software is changing, right? You think about the pandemic, a lot of us moving to collaboration software, the Zoom, the Microsoft changes from Exchange to Exchange Online here in the cloud. One of the top questions we always get about securing the DIB is whether or not, in order to qualify as a CMMC certified organization, we have to have a specific kind of cloud, right? Can we use Microsoft in the data centers that they give us, for, US East, US West, Canada, these different regions that they have that may not necessarily be GCC high certified, right? And of course, we see the word GCC high show up all the time when we think about, government contract and sensitive data and things like that. And then, of course, we also hear about FedRAMP, right? NIST 853, right? The idea that, FedRAMP certified data centers are also something that a lot of agencies have leveraged in the past when asking a provider, whether that's a third-party hosting company or some sort of software vendor, whether or not they are capable of supporting them in their requirements. So the question to you, Matt, is, does CMMC certification require the use of either FedRAMP certified or GCC high certified for cloud-based security services?
Yeah, Adam, great question. Is one that we've certainly gotten a lot as well. And I look forward to the department kind of closing out this issue here soon. I think they may, there should be some information on this in our town hall, which will be next Tuesday. But here's how the current policy is that if you are a DIB company, an organization seeking CMMC certification, and you're using a cloud service provider, or frankly, even MSPs kind of come into this discussion. If you're using a cloud provider that is not FedRAMP moderate, then you have to be using a cloud provider that that is using essentially FedRAMP moderate equivalency. And so the assessor of a C3PO during the assessment, if you don't have a FedRAMP moderate for your cloud provider, they would have to be able to determine the equivalency of FedRAMP moderate. So the $64,000 question has always been, how would an assessor determine whether or not FedRAMP moderate equivalency has been attained? There is one use case that has answered the mail on this. The department hasn't said that it's a precedent-setting policy yet, but that might be where they come down, which is the company has to retain a FedRAMP 3 PAO, essentially the FedRAMP equivalent of a C3PO, to attest that equivalency is being used. That the security architecture of that cloud service provider, that non-FedRAMP cloud service provider, is employing FedRAMP moderate equivalency. And so if they were to sign a test to that saying we looked at it and as a FedRAMP 3 PAO, it's equivalent, that answers the mail. I hope there are other ways to determine equivalency, but this is one of those, the DFARS rules, and when it was written, there was more work to be done. And I expect that the department will be speaking. This is one of the things we need clarified before we can start with assessments in the voluntary period, is how does an assessor determine FedRAMP equivalency? That's the policy right now. If you're not using a FedRAMP cloud provider, you've got to have a FedRAMP moderate equivalent. How do you assess equivalent? Stay tuned. We hope to get the answer soon.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. And for those of you who have maybe never heard the word FedRAMP before, again, free consultation is there. If you don't know what GCC High is, if you don't know what NIST 853 is, you don't have to go and try to dig through the internet to find this. Book some time with us for free. We will talk about it and deconstruct this stuff for you, so you know where to go to get authoritative information on this type of thing. Number two question that we typically get is, of course, if you're under DFARS, federal acquisition requirements, the NIST 800-171 assessment has been part of your life probably for the past several years. If it hasn't, maybe you didn't know that this was something you needed to do. But of course, as you think about CMMC and its relationship to NIST 800-171, one of the top questions that we get, especially as we're going through rulemaking, and I start to see some questions coming in about when is CMMC 2.0 official. So we'll try to just reiterate what that means as the rulemaking comes in. But the question to you, Matt, is, do people still have to do 800-171 as a self-assessment under DFARS requirements while we're sort of in wait or waiting for 2.0 to become the rule?
Yeah, Adam, the answer is absolutely they do. Those DFARS 7012 requirements, that NIST 800-171 requirement that for most defense contractors, they're going to attest in SPRS to that. Some of the DIB gets a call from the DIBCAC and says, we're going to come do a DIBCAC high or moderate assessment of your conformance to 800-171. So those are still in effect. Those haven't changed. What CMMC is going to be doing is requiring a third-party verification that you're doing what you've supposed to been doing the past few years. So no, those are still in effect. If you've got a contract that's got that DFARS clause, everything that's happening in CMMC does not obviate that. Those are still in effect.
And I'll remind the audience, of course, this is not legal advice, but please, try to educate yourselves on things like the False Claims Act, on the Christian doctrine. Just because those clauses may not even be present in some of your contracting language when you submit proposals through MERCs or a contracting site does not mean that they are not automatically enforced, right? And so the clauses don't necessarily have to be present, written, and in front of you for you to fall under those clauses. So just to educate yourself, again, reach out to us if you're unclear about what we're talking about or how we're mentioning the DFARS clauses, CUI, FCI, and the legal components to that, please feel free to reach out to us. We'll try to point you in the direction for authoritative sources to help clarify these things for you.
Yeah,
Number three, sorry, go ahead.
On that, you raise a good point. I too am not an attorney, but if you follow the attorneys who follow CMMC, once 2.0 was announced, you heard a lot more dialogue about False Claims Act, use of the whistleblower mechanism to identify those companies that might not be attesting truthfully. So whether you're a level 1 and you're doing the self-attestation, or you're currently doing the 800-171 and SPRS, I think the government, if you look at the way some of that Federal Register language was put in, some of the references, it does seem to me that the government's going to be taking a tighter rein on self-attestation. And to the point I made earlier, that it's going to be senior officials of the company, the CEO, the COO, a board member, the CFO, that's going to have to make that attestation. So the government is looking to have self-attestation with teeth.
Awesome. Yeah. Number three, as we go through the questions here, and feel free again, ask questions throughout. We do see a number coming in. We're going to get to those in just a second. But the number three top question that we hear from ActZero, from our client base is, looking at, when you expand, a lot of the people in the defense industrial base are part of an ecosystem. There's a lot of acquisition that happens in an intercompany acquisition, right? Where you're maybe rolling up multiple people adjacent or in the same category. And so a lot of questions we get is that somewhere through the merger process comes the function of collaborating or connecting to those IT resources, right? So if you have controlled unclassified information, you have CUI with the as part of performing your contract. When you think about the agencies you've just merged with, the question usually comes up, okay, well, what happens now? If I certify or if I go and self-assess against something like NIST 800-171 or CMMC 2.0, how does it actually impact me in terms of the enclave, the scope of networked systems, if I go and connect or share something like my Gmail or my network or something else with my newly acquired entity? So does that actually change the scope of your enclave or your requirements if you acquire and then merge two IT systems or networks together, Matt?
It's a great question. I won't have the full answer here because this is one of the still developing policy issues that I think we've got to finish before we can start. I will say this, for any merger and acquisition activity, it's going to be probably a case-by-case basis depending on the post-merger integration. There are some mergers where one company is absorbing another as a wholly owned subsidiary. There's no post-merger integration. That's probably going to be pretty clean. What we are going to probably require, if not ask, is that anyone who has a CMMC certification needs to either alert us or maybe their C3PO that they used for the last certification, and this is where the details still need to be worked out, that you have undergone or about to undergo a merger event or some type of change of ownership, change of control. That will probably trigger just a phone interview of, okay, who's the other company? What are those technical integration plans for the new consolidated company? In some cases, depending on the answer to those questions, I could see a validation of the CMMC practices to maintain that certification. Other cases, maybe the concerns or the questions can be satisfied based on a couple of Zoom calls. So TBD in terms of how that's going to work. But to be clear, a merger is going to be one of those major actions that's going to require you to essentially say, hey, someone to re-engage with the ecosystem and validate whether or not you need to get another look at your environment to make sure that CUI is still being protected as it was when before you got merged. So you'll be hearing more about this as soon as we nail down that procedure.
Very similar to the number three question. This is just sort of almost like a dovetail of the same. If I am collecting controlled unclassified information on one of my workstations, does that now mean that my entire network or SaaS connections or other things that I use within IT even though the CUI is only on that one workstation, does that put them in scope for this requirement for CMMC and NIST?
Yeah, so I'll say a couple of things. One, I try not to answer these types of questions because we've got RPs and RPOs, like yourself, who we register to serve just this purpose. What I would say to answer that question is I think it's good now that the department has released the scoping guidance for level 2, and you can find it on the CMMC website. You talk about those 5 different kinds of assets, those assets that store, transmit, process CUI, those assets that provide security services that don't touch CUI, those assets that may or may not touch CUI, those assets that could but currently aren't and they're being protected. So it really is going to be case by case. I can't, even if I were an RPO or an RP, I couldn't answer that question until I saw the schematic of your network. If I saw exactly how you're bounding your CUI and the access controls you have with that one workstation. So my short answer is enlist an RP and RPO, and they can give you some good advice on how that could be scoped.
And for those that are understood, like registered practitioner organizations like ActZero, RPs like myself, obviously spend a lot of time looking through those technical diagrams and application architectures with our customers, right? So a lot of them will come up with their own, sometimes proprietary way of trying to avoid the requirement by either taking what they believe is network limitations or application restrictions or something else that they feel separates that CUI, that access, those identities, those processes, those systems from others. And in many cases, they make assumptions about how they've protected that asset, and therefore, a lot of the other requirements are not in scope. And so it's very helpful sometimes to discuss exactly how that's architected with an RP to make sure that you are doing the right stuff and not necessarily leaving a door open for these risks.
And just to follow up on that, some people ask, why did the accreditation body create these registries of registered practitioners and registered provider organizations? It's because we heard early on from industry, from the DIB, that there were so many people saying, "Come here for CMMC advice." There was no way to, who really knows what they're talking about. And so we stood this up either at the individual level or at the organizational level for those folks to take a class with us. First off, we do background checks. So we're checking guns, doing background checks, making sure these companies are legitimate. And then, the individuals have to take a course and then take a test. So encourage everyone, when you're seeking help, go to our website. You'll see the list of RPs and RPOs, and that's the best way to get you off to a good start.
Awesome. All right, we've got a couple of questions that the audience is asking. We've got a couple here that I'd like to ask you, Matt. The first one is that as we go through, if you're going through the RPO, one of the first things that comes up is who's in scope for using CMMC requirements. And one of the things as organizations who are trying to get CMMC certified, you usually think about the CUI or the FCI kind of triggering that process of understanding whether this applies to you or not. One of the types of companies that seems to get, I'm going to call it a pass, but not necessarily a pass, is commercial off-the-shelf software or COTS software. So, your Microsofts and those types of very large, very prevalent organizations. Certainly, as you follow cybersecurity news, you look at the software supply chain, everything from SolarWinds and Exchange Hafnium and these other types of vulnerabilities that lead to cyber compromise. One of the questions that we see here in the chat, I think, is apt, is how will CMMC 2.0 affect commercial off-the-shelf software providers or COTS providers to the DoD, if at all?
Yeah,
Matt, I'll pose that to you. Sorry. How are COTS?
Yeah, my expectation. So in CMMC 1.0, as you allude, Adam, that the COTS providers are off the table. They're not included in this. I would expect that part of the rule to continue through with CMMC 2.0. But who knows what will happen in rulemaking? We'll have to see how that comes out. But yes, the COTS providers, that's not part of the scope. But I also say, I think as we look at CMMC, we've got 2.0. If you heard the department when they announced it, as we stripped away some of those CMMC 1.0 practices, some of those maturity requirements and those other controls. They said that they are going to be working with NIST down the road to continue to address what they think might be some gaps in 800.171. And when you think about zero trust and some other advanced security concepts and practices, whether it's CMMC 3.0 or what have you, I can see COTS being brought in. I know I'm just speculating here, but I think that CMMC is going to continue to evolve as the security environment and the threat landscape evolves as well.
Awesome. One of the other questions we have is about, it says, when is level 3 going to be released? And when is the government going to make CMMC 2.0 official? So the purpose of this webinar is to try to explain to the DIB and parts of this defense industrial base, the ecosystem, right? So when we talk about, the government making something official, or the rulemaking process, or the idea of 3 PAOs and assessments becoming something that you can then certify against the 2.0 draft that we have now, it's important to understand, I think, that you are going to see CMMC as the standards, the checks that we're doing, the controls. Those are going to evolve, right? They always will, right? It's not like when you get your certification, even if you do have 2 or 3 years where it's valid, that we're not going to continue to refine that. And Matt, I can speak to obviously that part, but this question is probably best suited for you, is to say, as you've talked about the timeline for the rulemaking process and what I think interpret as official here, how do we expect the 2.0 requirements, as you talk about NIST maybe being influenced, and perhaps the draft maybe changing a little bit as you go through some of this stuff, and we get more requests for comments? How does the standard change, and how does the what I guess would you say is the most official stamp of these are the requirements and let's do those?
Yeah. So I don't think it can. I think the NIST 800.171 standard is the CMMC standard. When we talk about what might change in rulemaking, is talking about, the POAMs and waivers and how that's all going to be managed. What I was referring to is what the department had said back in November, is that looking over the horizon, they expect to continue their dialogue with NIST, and over time make the case if 800.171 needs to be added upon or modified. But for now, for the CMMC that is that we're in now, it's 800.171. And in terms of the question, when's it going to start? That's what I was trying to hit on with that earlier slide. The mandatory CMMC will not likely start until around May of 2023. So no one is going to be required to get certified until then. However, the department recognizes the investment that this ecosystem has made, that many of you have made, and some of those companies are ready to get assessed. Those will be assessed under the interim voluntary period. Those will be recognized as CMMC assessments. And in fact, you'll get a longer validity period for that certification. And we hope to start those here very soon. I know that John Ellis at DIPCAC went on the record last night with a reporter saying, hopefully earlier this summer. I was hoping for spring, but as I said, there's still some doctrinal issues and some IT issues we're working through, but it's going to be starting here in the next few months. And that to me is when CMMC starts. It's not mandatory, but when assessments kick in, we're off and running. And as I've said, on the classroom, that's already up and running. So if you want to take a CMMC class, those are being offered as we speak.
And again, if you want more clarity on the question, if you think, you understand what level 3 is, but you may be referring to the 1.0 level 3 and not the new 2.0 level 3, or you're unclear about the NIST 800.171 requirements that have always been in place, feel free to contact us and we will fully describe and explain what's already something that is a requirement, how that's assessed, how that's adjudicated, how there's legal liability from NIST 800.171 under DFARS, as well as how to approach self-assessment, joining and trying to certify early, how long that certification will last, because I think a lot of people are looking at trying to get certified to meet board level expectations from their management about this program that they hear a lot about, and maybe they're confused as to where to get started, how to move forward. talking to us can kind of help you go in the right direction there. So if we didn't answer the question fully, because there's a lot of things in there to unpack, feel free to reach out and we'll dig into each one.
And Adam, I didn't, because that one question I think was, when is level 3 going to start? 800-172, which is essentially the requirements for level 3. Those have been under construction. I think I just read earlier this week that the draft of those, they just finished up. So I suspect the department, or rather NIST, will be releasing those, I would imagine, in the coming weeks.
Awesome. Yeah. So if you were talking about the new level 3, the NIST 800-172, and that's what you're talking about coming into draft, that obviously touches on that. Okay, great. One of the questions we also have is, there's been talk about the CMMC certification for other Fed departments. Do you see that happening after the rulemaking is complete? Of course, I think they mean outside of the defense branch and things like that, like outside of the DIB. Is CMMC going to become part of just, government certification?
I hope so. I've always hoped so, because the last thing industry needs is have to attain different standards for different departments. I mean, I worked in the sector. We had contracts with DoD, with DHS, with DOE. Do we really want companies having to jump around to different standards? That's why I call CMMC the unifying standard. We've had some discussions with some federal agencies. This might be ultimately a GSA decision, but I think if you look at President Biden's cybersecurity executive order from May of last year, it shows clearly the need to shore up the contracting base of the federal acquisition community, and I would hope that everything gravitates towards CMMC, but nothing official yet.
Awesome. I see a question about, where do I find local CMMC 2.0 training? And obviously the word training can mean a lot in this context, because the ecosystem is quite large, right? So if you're looking to be trained to become an assessor, the C3PAO program, there's of course, the CMMCAB.org website is a great place to get started to learn, who applies for that, how to apply for that. There's computer-based training there as well. Once your application goes forward, obviously there's the RP program, the Registered Practitioner Organization, and then there's also even small things like we've done today, where we sponsor lectures to have more of a, I'm not going to call it custom, but just sort of a high-level discussion about CMMC in general, where we can get real facts and questions like we're doing today to your organization as well. That helps to obviously sponsor and help the CMMC AB collect revenue they need to obviously hire the people that are working so hard on this. Not to plug the AB's program there, but Matt, would you say anything else in terms of the best place to kind of enter from education perspective?
No, you hit on it, Adam. It really depends on what type of training are you looking for. And you said it there. There's the professional training to become a certified assessor or instructor, or to be a training for a registered practitioner. That's where you look into us, or on our website, those licensed training providers who teach and provide these classes. But to Adam's point, if you're a member of a DIB company, or you're a company that wants to get certified, the RPOs have trained, just like these webinars. This is training, in my mind, train you about the standard, and that does need to go through us.
Okay, one more question here, and I think we're almost at time. So again, if we didn't answer your questions, feel free to use the contact us button. You can obviously look at the screen right here. We're kind of big yellow, big font here, trying to get that across. And so the last question I think we can ask here is, will non-certified contractors, and I think by contractors, I think they mean part of the DIB, so like government contractors, because the government obviously uses contractors for everything, will non-certified contractors be able to be awarded new contracts? 1.0 stated they would not be eligible.
So that was a 1.0 rule. I expect that rule to continue, but as I said before, that's the kind of thing that will come out of rulemaking in terms of how that's managed. But in general, CMMC certification will be a requirement if that RFP has the CMMC requirement in it. You'll need to show proof of certification before you can be awarded. And at what stage do you need to have it before you submit the proposal, or you just have to have it before the award's made? That's going to come out in rulemaking. I can't speak to that. That's a governmental decision. But the basic tenet of, if you want to work with DoD, you're going to need CMMC certification.
And again, if you guys are unclear what the word POAM means, what an SSP is, what these waivers are, feel free to reach out and we'll try to describe exactly what it means as you go through that process to see, what is something that you can say is happening as part of a contract, what are things that allow you waivers, those kinds of things, which again are still obviously up in the air in terms of their specifics, but it's good to understand what those things mean if you're looking to see how you might contract with the government and make this investment with the CMMC. Just to plug the resources again, we put together a tracker, testing and validating white paper, and of course a webinar on 1.0, 2.0. I would say this webinar probably takes a more current approach to where we are and lets everybody know what's developed as of March 23 here. Thank you so much all for attending, and I really appreciate, Matt, your time and energy with all this, and maybe someday we'll do it again. Thank you.
Love to. Thank you, Adam.
Cheers. Bye, everyone.